Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our launch 2020 Q4 final launch event of the year. Hope you're having a great day 2 of the event. We are happy to have you here. I am especially happy to have you here because I like to have people to talk to. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be talking about design in the sky using Cloud Slice with Lab on Demand. And we're going to explain what the term means and how you set it up. My name is Brian Bork. I am a senior technical readiness trainer here at Learn on Demand Systems. I am supported by a great cast of characters here in the chat with us. And we are lucky to have representing our technical services team. We have a couple of people. We have Ronald Thompson, and we've got Ryan Hall, and we have a couple of guest visitors as attendees from our technical services team. And we also have Carl down there from our team as well. He's a technical services team member on level 2, which is tier 2 services. And then we, of course, have Kristen Louie, who is here to make sure that we get you all the links and all of the information that you need as part of your as part of the session. So great cast of characters. Just a few general housekeeping notes. First of all, if you haven't already, go ahead and mute your microphone and keep your camera off. We'll turn those back on at the end for a Q&A session. Of course, at any time you can type chat. And I'm looking, by the way, I'm looking off screen here because that's where my chat is. So every time I reference the chat, I look over there. But the chat is there for you to be able to type your questions. Ronald has been doing a tremendous job of answering questions, and every once in a while, Kristen or one of the other people also contributes. You can also contribute. Feel free to turn the chat into a little mini Slack channel there and share ideas amongst yourselves if you would like. But go ahead and type your questions in there. Please note this session is being recorded, and that recording will be available after the session is over. I want to comment. I've got a question once about this picture that is used for my biopic, whether or not that is my actual hair or if it was Photoshop. I don't know if you can see or not, but my hair actually isn't as gray as it is now. In this picture, and that was taken about 5 years ago because I've been an MCT for 21 years, and this year was when I got my 15-year jacket. So my 20-year jacket came later, but I can tell that this picture was actually my hair because my hair wasn't completely gray at that time, and it is now, which you may be able to tell. I blend into the white background of my screen quite nicely. Back when this picture was taken, it was my hair had a little bit of the light brown that it initially had at one point in my life. I wasn't born with gray hair, but it sure feels like I've been gray longer than I've actually had color in my hair. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about you. What can you do? You can post and win. Don't forget to go out there, post online, take a picture of you or your screen showing that you're attending. Post it on LinkedIn, Twitter, and or Facebook. Mention that you're attending Launch Q4 and make sure to tag us. We won't know about the post unless you do. So please go in to LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook and use the appropriate tags. Kristen's going to help you out and put those tags right in the chat. All right. Let's see here. So what is on our agenda? It's time for you to pay attention to the slides, not to me. So I'm going to turn off my camera And we're going to discuss what Cloud Slice is, what's needed, and then once it's in place, how do I do it? So what is cloud slicing? Start with a subscription or two or dozens. In AWS, instead of being called a subscription, it's called an account. You slice it into resource groups. Now, there's not a direct correlation in AWS. We use stacks, but stacks are more along the lines of ARM templates or resource group templates that we use. AWS, everything is covered under the account, and then you create the resource, and that resource is part of the stack. But when we're talking about Azure, and that's what we'll be focusing on today, slicing it up into resource groups is a term. That's where the term cloud slice comes from. We carve out a subscription, and we turn that subscription into a resource group. Then we create users dynamically on the fly when the launch button is pushed. And at each launch, a user is created and given access to the resource group that has also been created on the fly. So the key to remember with this is what you're trying to do is you're trying to teach people how to work in Azure, but you're trying to do it without them taking up a bunch of resources that they don't need. So you're trying to keep them focused on a specific set of resources that you want to teach them about. If you were trying to teach somebody everything about Azure, A, good luck, and B, Cloud Slice isn't really the right tool for that job. A trial account is the right tool for that job. This is designed to teach somebody how to do something in Azure. So for example, maybe you're going to teach them how to make a storage account, or you're going to teach them how to make containers within that storage account. In order to do that, you have to give them access to that resource, which is a storage account. But you want them to not have access to everything else in Azure. Otherwise, you end up with something where your entire Azure account is full of students going out and doing a bunch of meaningless resources that are just costing you money and not actually educating them about something. So Cloud Slice takes a basic subscription have or an account in AWS and carves it up into chunks, which you then give to people as they click on the launch button, and you give them a dynamically created user account, a dynamically created resource group, and that user account is given a certain level of access to that resource group, and then you move forward. So why do we use Cloud Slice? What's it for, right? You could teach somebody by telling them, all right, here's what you need to do. We're going to start class, and you're going to go out and you're going to get a trial account for Azure, which works most of the time, but trial accounts for Azure are a little bit tricky, and they're limited by Microsoft, especially with the plethora of resources that are being used now on with lockdowns and work from home and stuff like that. So you can't be guaranteed to be able to get a trial account. And if you do get a trial account, that trial account is not guaranteed to have access to all the resources you need. So this way you take an already existing subscription, which you may have to pay for. I'm not going to lie. There is a cost associated with running things in Azure. But when you do that, you are giving up, if you were to have dozens of subscriptions just so that users could use that, you're going to have a lot of residue. You have people who could leave things running, which is going to bring up your costs. The better way to do it is to give them access to just the components that they need. And that's what Cloud Slice does. So then your question becomes, well, that's great. How do I do it? What does it take to get this going? So how do I set up Cloud Slice? You don't need a virtual machine profile in order to set up a Cloud Slice. You can actually teach directly from a browser to the portal. And that's what I'm going to show you in a little bit. You can always use a virtual machine with CloudSlice and build a hybrid lab and have that machine work with the resource group and the user account. The important thing to remember there is that you can't guarantee that somebody has the PowerShell add-ons for Azure, or that they have Visual Studio or whatever. And so if they don't have that on their machine, not having a VM in place can actually be a hindrance, especially with something like Visual Studio. If you're trying to teach somebody how to code something in Azure, it is a long, tedious process of waiting for students for 30 minutes or 45 minutes to download and install Visual Studio Code Community, and then have that set up properly and using the right accounts and things like that. Whereas you could give them a virtual machine that has it already installed, configured, and ready to go, and then have them get a Azure account that they can use to connect to that system. So a hybrid, we're going to show you simplicity here. This is how easy it is to do. So we're not going to be using a virtual machine. You do need to have a valid Azure subscription. And there is a little bit of prep work you need to do in both Azure and Lab on Demand. To set it up is not complicated, but it's a little bit of prep work. But then you set up your cloud subscription pool and subscription. And once it's set up, then you can use CloudSlice whenever needed within your organization. And what we're talking about here is you will be able to take that subscription and carve it up for any lab you want to use CloudSlice on. All right. So you set it up once. You can do this with multiple accounts so that you can distribute the load, or you can set it up with a single account. And by account, I mean subscription. Now, there are actually two different CloudSlices. One is CloudSlice subscription, which we're not going to cover today, although it's the one that most people have questions about. The reason most people have questions about it is because it's complicated. You need to have a special Azure account called an SA, or service agreement. That SA account does give you the ability to be able to give out other subscriptions to Azure that are under your cost center. This allows global admin permissions within Azure when needed. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, well, that's what I need to have. I've got to have that. You might be right. It does sometimes happen that we do need to have global admin permissions. For example, if you're covering how billing works, or if you're covering specific application apps, or I'm sorry, app reg stuff, where you've got to have certain permissions within the cloud subscription. CloudSlice subscription is usually better to have us incur the cost and bill you for that cost, rather than have you try to get the correct subscription and get it set up. So we have a CloudSlice subscription that we use for certain mock and for other types of use. And what that does is it actually builds up a subscription, and then at the end it tears it down and gets rid of it. And that means that we don't incur costs for things that are left running or anything like that. But there is additional charging that goes on, not just for the orchestration fee, but also for the use of the cloud subscription, CloudSlice subscription. Now, the more common type, and the type we're going to talk about today, is the orange one, which is CloudSlice Resource Group, or CSR. This is the default CloudSlice, and it does almost everything. There are a few things that it can't do, like I said, when you talk about billing and setting up subscription global admin. It can't do that, but it can do, and one of the other things that it can't do is it can't set up, you can't give somebody a resource group and give them a user within that and then have them set up a resource group. So if what you're trying to teach them is how to set up a resource group, you have to have the C. But remember that you can give them multiple resource groups per lab. So if you want to give them an empty resource group and have them do things within it, you can talk to them about how they create that resource group and then say, here, a default resource group has been provided. Now take that resource group and configure it. So again, it really just requires a slight shift to the way you think when you want to work with a resource group. The single most important aspect of Cloud Slice is security. And there's no debate about this issue. There's no question about this issue. The number one reason that people have difficulty teaching Azure is because of misuse. Whether it's because a trial account has gotten locked out because of potential misuse, or whether it's because somebody has launched a bunch of virtual machines and left them running and run up costs. Somebody has created dozens of Databricks or data lakes, and you've got a resource lock on your account now because you use too many of those types of resources, so you can't create any more. Bitcoin mining, spinning up VMs and having them do Bitcoin mining. All of these things are possibilities for not just increased cost to you, but the possibility that all of your Azure access could get locked. Because remember, this is your account that's being carved up. You could still use this account for other things. Maybe, you know, as an instructor, for instance, you're delivering a class on Azure and you're using pre-configured resources. What happens if those resources get locked out because your students have had misuse on your account? So the good news is we have you covered in Lab on Demand using what we call access control policies, which allow you to specify what people can and can't do. And we actually take the approach of you can't do anything unless you manually specify what you are going to do. If you try to create a Cloud Slice without a access control policy in place, it will not let you save it. All right. So access control policies will allow you to create what you need to create and not allow you to not create what you shouldn't be able to create. So let's take a look at this in action and see what this all takes. And I'm not seeing any questions out there. So either you're all just mystified by all of this wonderful information, or you already know all of the things here and you have something very specific you're waiting to see. We'll see which one of those is actually true. All right, ending the slideshow and going into Lab on Demand. Now, I have two tabs open here, and my tabs are the LOD interface, and I'm logged on as a standard lab developer. I do have a little bit, you can see here, I've got a little bit of reporting capability and stuff like that with my administration. But under normal circumstances, this is a completely normal, oh, I still have a lab running here. We can go ahead and leave this because my lab was committing changes from a previous session. So I have that one running, but this is a standard admin level interface. And then in the other window, I am signed on to Azure. Now, the reason I'm signed on to Azure is because I am going to be working with a demo account. Now, the numbers and stuff that you're going to see here, I do want to let you know that even if you could use these numbers, these Cloud Slices would only be available to my subscription and not yours. So don't be thinking you're going to be getting some great, easy to use subscription here. But I do want to address David's question, because David's question is an important one, which is, do we need our own subscription or can we use yours like Mock? Well, and for those of you who don't know, Mock stands for Microsoft Official Curriculum, and a lot of Mock classes are about Azure. And there used to be a philosophy that we would use what were called Azure passes. And so you would go in as a instructor or as an operations manager for a class that you were going to have that was going to use Microsoft Official Curriculum. You'd fill out a form for a certain number of Azure passes. You would get a set of codes. You would give out one of those codes to each of your students. they would register with a either a made-up email address or just freshly created email address or their personal email address if they hadn't done that before. They would redeem that Azure Pass and they would have a 30-day or 5-day or a 7-day access. Well, Microsoft started taking away those passes at the beginning of the COVID pandemic because of an increase in misuse and just a general increase of use of Azure resources. So they had to take away the Azure passes. So what we've done is we've taken our cloud subscriptions, and put them together into a pool and added those to Mock. The good news is the answer to David's question is you can use our subscriptions, and we will bill you for the actual use of your resources during the time that your classes run. That is a very good news. However, if you have your own subscription, I strongly encourage you to do it for yourself because you will have much greater ability to be able to see reporting and control and things like that. So the answer to David's question is you do not have to bring your own subscription, but I recommend that you bring your own subscription. And quite honestly, we add on our orchestration fee and things like that to the cost of the Azure resource use. So it is very important to make sure that you to keep your costs down, you bring your own subscription. But bringing your own subscription might not be as hard as it seems. Now, I am an MCT, been an MCT for over 20 years, and I have my own subscription to Azure as an MCT. That's what I'm using here right now. Now, inside of here, I have several different directories. You can see that I've got them out here and they're available to me. I am using the Brian Azure demo here, and this is the name of my my on Microsoft tenant name. And this is the tenant ID as well. Now, these may not seem like they're very important, but as you'll see, they are pretty important. All right, so I'm going to turn that off for the second, and I'm going to go back to LOD because we're lab developers. So what do we need to do in LOD in order to make this happen? Well, we're going to do something called a subscription pool. And I'm going to, well, actually, what I'm going to do is before I go into the subscription pool, I'm going to show you how you can find out how to do this on your own. You really don't need me to show you that you have a wonderful help system set up. So when you type in help, you don't even have to search for anything. If you just go down to the categories, we have the Cloud Slice Setup Guide. And all you have to do, it's right in sort of the middle, upper middle, and you just click on that. And there's a lot of information about how to make this happen. And so we're going to choose how to enable Cloud Slice with LOD in Microsoft Azure. So I'm going to click on this. And now we're taken to the Cloud Slice Guide, Microsoft Azure Setup. And then here is something that you need to have, which is a global administrator on the tenant. You have to be the owner on the subscription, and that the subscriptions are enabled for all resource providers, which happen by default. Then you scroll down and you say, all right, how do I get Cloud Slice going? And you see here that it even gives you the warning. Hey, by the way, you need to be these things. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. So if you try to do this as let's say you were inside of a resource group and inside of, say, a mock, and you tried to create this by going in, you would not be a tenant owner and you wouldn't be the subscription owner. So you wouldn't be able to do this. But in order to do this, we have to go to the Azure portal. And I'm going to need to type some PowerShell, and I'm going to copy that PowerShell right now. You see that the guide even has a little copy to clipboard. And now I'm going to go over to Azure, and what I need to do is I need to use the Azure PowerShell in the portal. So I click on the Azure Cloud Shell, as they call it, And you see here that it comes up. Now, the first time you do this, it may come up with some sort of warning and say, hey, you don't have any storage specified. Just say accept and continue, or create and continue. But mine has already done that. We've done this a couple of times before. So it doesn't come up with a message after you've done it once or twice. So you can see here that it has come up. I apologize that it's down on the bottom, but no matter what I do, it's always going to be on the bottom, even if I make this slightly bigger. It's pretty close to the bottom anyway. So remember, I copied the instruction, and I'll just switch back here. Oops, not that page, this page. Now I'll bring it back up. There we go. I copied this PowerShell, and you may be saying, well, is this setting up sort of like a backdoor access to my Azure subscription? And the answer is kind of, but it's setting up an API essentially, and we are making sure that we set up the proper permissions and capabilities to set things up inside of LOD. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Control V. Oops, sorry. Right click and paste. And you see here what this is doing. It's going out and getting some GitHub. It's just a setup script that runs that's been pre-configured for LOD. Go ahead and hit enter. Now, once again, you may see some things that come up on mine that don't come up on yours, or you may see things that come up in yours that don't exist in mine. And the reason for that is that because I have run through this before as a demonstration, my account has already gotten some things. So you may get some questions like yes or no questions that don't appear in mine. But in general, just follow the instructions that are in the setup guide right here. But it just says here to follow the prompts and input the information it requests. So you can see here, it is giving me my current name and tenant information. Now, here is when it is a good idea to pull out Notepad, Notepad++, or Visual Studio Code, or whatever your favorite editor is, and copy the information from your current tenant information and paste it into Notepad. And then save it. Don't leave that out there just in case it, something happens and something locks up or something crashes. So go ahead and save that to your desktop. I'll move this off so you don't see everything that's on my desktop. And I'm going to call this sample Cloud Slice setup. All right, and it's just a text file. That's fine. It's just saved now, so I've got it out there. I'll bring it back later when I need it. But the tenant information is important. It can also be verified, so there. Go ahead and press. Oops, enter here. Enter the name of your service principal. If left blank, it will default to Cloud Slice app. Well, just to make this unique, I'm going to call it Brian dash, oops, I can type, honest. There we go. CS dash app. There we go. And enter. That's just so because I've made so many of these before. Now it's making a new service principal, and it tells you, by the way, this information will never be displayed again. So make sure you copy this. You see the yellow here. It cannot be retrieved in the future. So now might be a good time to copy this because we need the application ID and the secret as well as the name. I'm going to copy that. And once again, here's my notepad and paste. And then I'm going to move that off again. And then it says, make sure you have this, enter when you're ready. Go ahead and enter. And then it says, here's the subscription. Which one of these do you want to set it up? And I am going to leave it blank because I'm ready to proceed with the one that's there. And then would you like to reset, exit setup, add more subscriptions, or continue with the current selection? So I'm going to type proceed. And that's it. Now, on your side, it may take a little bit more time, but what this has just done is gone through and run some things that set up the subscription. You may see a little bit of text flash by, but ultimately, when you get back to the PowerShell thing, you are now done in Azure. Now, we're going to follow the rest of the instructions that we have here to create a new subscription pool. So I go to subscription pool. I click on create. It's going to be Azured. Its mode is always going to be shared unless you're going to set up a dedicated Cloud Slice subscription to be able to, if you're going to give them a Cloud Slice subscription level access instead of a Cloud Slice resource group. Now I'm going to give it a name, and in this case, I'm going to call it Brian's Sample CS Access. Organization. If this were for some reason unavailable, I wanted to put a message in there, I could. Enabled health checks and the health check interval, which I'll leave at week. Then we go over to the authentication. Now remember, this tenant name is, we need to have the tenant name. So is the tenant name just this, or is it this? And the answer is you want to put the onmicrosoft.com in place as well. That's the full tenant name. That's the reason why I showed you before, back in my Azure page, when I was up here and went to switch directory. This is the actual full tenant name right here, brianazure.demo.microsoft.com. If you only give it the Brian Azure demo, it would fail. Okay. So make sure you put that in. And then we need the application ID. Oops. Get my notepad back here. You need the application ID and the application secret. So I'm going to take my application ID and my application secret right here. Those will be generated every time. Come on. Oh, that's right. You have to click on show, then you paste. There we go. And then you can hide it again. And then save. Now we've created the pool, but we still haven't actually created the subscription. So I'm going to go in and create the cloud subscription. Basic information is Brian CS. And then I need my cloud subscription ID. Now my cloud subscription ID is and this is the ID from my tenant that I'm using. So here is the reason why I needed to have these. Copy that and paste that in. And I put it in a description. I can put in an expiration if I want to make sure that this doesn't get used after a certain time. And then I can also enable billing reporting to get information when the Cloud Slice is being used. I can also override my pool client authentication, but because this is part of a pool, I'm going to just use what the pool is telling it. And last but not least is storage. Now you may think, I've got to fill out a bunch more information here, Brian. This is only if you're going to be using cloud hosting and spinning up virtual machines in the cloud instead of doing it in our data center. Now it is possible to do, and there's nothing wrong with doing it, but you do need some other information, and we have information about that, but that's not really Cloud Slice, that is cloud hosting. Okay, so that's not part of our discussion here. All right, I am done with that notepad for now, so I'm going to go ahead and move that off screen, save it so that I have it just in case something were to go wrong, and I click on OK. And at this point, you can see here that I don't have, my state is ready, but my health status is none because we haven't synced Azure and my Cloud Slice subscription. So now, at any point, I could go in and use this Cloud Slice any place I wanted to give somebody a cloud account. Now I'm going to use a different cloud account because this validation could take quite some time before it actually comes up and says, yes, this is healthy and ready to use. So I'm going to go ahead and work with a cloud slice that already exists and show you and explain to you how it got configured. So I'm going to go into Brian's Cloud Slice lab here. And this is an example of one of our challenge labs that is purely cloud-based. Now, I could show you how you set this up, but I would rather take an already existing example so you can see a finished product at the end. But let's go ahead and take a look at what it takes to build Cloud Slice. We're going to edit this profile, and you'll see here that, first of all, our virtualization platform is set to none. This is the case if we were using just a pure cloud portal and we weren't going to be using a virtual machine in a hybrid scenario. So if we're just using Cloud Slice and giving people access to a portal, we would have our virtualization platform set to none. If we were using a hybrid, we would go ahead and set it to Hyper-V, or maybe use Docker if we were using a container, something like that. But in this particular case, we're going ahead and using our virtualization platform as none. Then when we go to the Cloud tab, we go to the orchestration field. Now, our orchestration field is what gives us access to our, this is what gives us Cloud Slice capability, all right? So the Cloud Slice capability that we have here is we're using Azure. We have the ability to use a subscription pool. This is a subscription pool that has already been validated and is healthy. If I actually go here and try to access this, I can't. I was given access to this by somebody inside the company. Remember, I'm using a standard lab developer account. If I were to create a new, hold on one second. If I were to create a new lab profile and create a custom environment, set this to none, and go to cloud, I could set this to either Azure or AWS. This one has already been set for me. But now when I go into my subscription pool, I will only see subscriptions that I have access to. But we at Lab on Demand can give you access in your lab profile to other Cloud Slice subscriptions. So if I wanted to, I could select this one, put it in place, and then I would be able to go free. But because that's already been done for me here, I've got the subscription pool in place. Now, of course, I could choose to replace that and replace it with the only one that I know about, which is this one, but I'm going to leave it in place because we know it works this way. Paul, I'm going to defer your question to near the end because that is important, but we're actually going to, well, maybe the question will be answered by the next section here, but you will let me know at the end if we need to revisit your question. So one of the things that a lot of people get caught up on is this whole terminate lab thing. When you have a deployment failure, if something were to happen, like something doesn't spin up properly in Azure, or you have too many Databricks labs in use as a certain account, something like that. If it fails to deploy, what do you want to do? And when you are working on your lab and building your lab, you probably want to send user notification, because that way you can go into your Azure subscription and take a look there. But if you are working and you're delivering this in a deliverable environment, you should always switch it to terminate lab. That way they'll get a message that has an error on it, and then they can click on launch and get a different one. All right, so the thing I think might answer Paul's question here is the data center availability. And this is, in my way, one of the best features we've added to Cloud Slice in the recent past. It gives you the ability to say where this resource group that you're making is going to spin up and be delivered from. And this is you controlling this at a lab profile level. So when somebody clicks on the launch button, the resource group is going to spin up in the closest region to them that you have selected in this list. So you go to the data center and you see here that by default it's set to East US. Well, I shouldn't say by default. I have it set to East US, which means even though I'm in Central US, when I connect to this, I am connecting to the East US region. Now, that can be important for two reasons. One of them is because of geographic location. If I'm in London and this lab profile is set to connect to the East US data center region, that means that I'm going to, when I launch this lab and I get spun up, that portal that I'm connecting to is going to be in East US because that's the only choice I have. So if I wanted to, I could add, say, London or UK or EU. So here's, for example, UK South. I would put that in, and now if when I click on launch as a student, it's going to look at where I am geographically, and it's going to say, oh, you're in London? We will give you a launch from the UK data center, not a launch from the East US data center. However, there's the other side of that coin, which is certain resources are only available in certain regions. So you have to know, you as a lab developer have to know whether or not that data center region has the resource you want. So for example, if God forbid you were teaching a class about how to work with I don't know, NVMs that have hundreds of dollars of cost per hour to run. If you were going to be doing that, that may only exist in 4 regions in the world. Now, you could potentially make that spin up in any one of those 4 regions, and that might be close enough to you. But just remember that the end user's connectivity to the portal and the resource is going to be limited by where you put this. There is a handy dandy selection at the top for check all. There's also an uncheck all so that you can do that. Okay. Now, remember, I said that we've spin up a dynamic user account. It does, but it starts with a certain name, and that name has a preface or preface or prefix that is static. So in this case, it's CS dash, and then based on the globally unique launch ID of this lab instance, it will append that onto the end, and that means that this user will only be valid for this user instance. So that's how we get you a dynamically, globally unique name. But you could add another user account and call it Brian Dash. All right, and now it's going to be Brian Dash plus the lab instance ID, and then you can give that user different permissions. So you're not limited to just a single user that you give them. All right. Then we have our Cloud Slice resource group, or our Cloud resource group, and this is called the CSST. That is its prefix, and then we have our replacement token, which is 343. Notice that we are setting to override region. So now, not only can you make certain things available in certain regions, you on a lab level, you can have it be on a resource group level. So you can override something where this part of the resource is always going to be spun up in this location. So remember what I said, you have to know what region your resources are spinning up, even if all of your Azure portal stuff is coming out of the UK region. When you spin up this resource is going to be spun up in East US. Okay. So that you can override that region, or by default, that box is unchecked, and then it will use whatever it is. All right, so then we have our permissions. We have 4 levels of permissions. You've got contributor, owner, and reader. Those permissions are exactly the same as the Azure permissions that you would assign to a user account to a resource within your subscription. So contributor means that you can make some changes, but not all the changes. You can't change certain permissions. Owner, you can change all things. And then reader, you can't make any modifications. You can only go in and check. Then we have resource templates. And these are just like, if you're familiar with ARM, the Azure resource templates, or resource, I forgot what the M stands for. Resource model, I can't remember. But the ARM template of Azure. What happens is when you generate a resource within Azure, you can actually look at the code that spins up. It's a JSON code that spins up a certain type of technology in Azure. In this particular case, I am making up a cloud slice storage item. Now, once again, because I was given access to this, I can't actually go in and create the template from scratch, or I can't view the template, but I could create a template from scratch. And here is where you would just paste that JSON that you get from Azure. So in Azure, when you create, like, let's say you go into Azure and you create a storage account, you can actually go in and see the JSON that spins up that storage account. You can come in and put it in here, and then that will spin up for every single user, and they will be given permission to that on demand. So when they click the launch button, they're given a user account. That user account is within a resource group. That resource group has a certain item that is spun up, and that spun up is available. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel. I don't need to actually do that. There we go. And then the access control policies. Remember how I said that the leading cause of difficulty within an Azure world is misuse, and we have the tools, access control policies, to be able to help remedy that. Once again, I get an access denied because I was assigned this, but I can create a policy from scratch, and we have policies that are out there to help you. But you primarily start off with the concept of least permission. You want to make sure that you're not giving people access to things that they shouldn't have access to. So it is deny. The policy is just deny all. But you put that at the end, and then you give it a list of things that you allow. And so, like, for example, in this particular case, there's a storage group and other things that are a storage account and containers and stuff like that that they can create. But as I will show you when we go in and actually launch this lab now, and fortunately this comes up very quickly. We can get rid of our instructions in the background. It only takes a few seconds to spin this up. Now, what it's doing at this point is it's creating the resource group. It's putting the user in as a contributor and creating the user, and boom, here we go. Now, in the background, it is also creating some other resources. You can see here that all the challenge resources are now provisioned for me. So I'm going to go in ahead and use the account that has been given to me. And you can see here, I've got all of the information about my username and password. It's also in the instructions as well. So I can go ahead and copy this by clicking on it and go ahead and paste and next. And I can copy the password and paste. Notice this is true copy and paste as opposed to type text. That's because we're not going into a virtual machine. We're just going from one browser to the other browser. And here I am. It feels like I am inside of my own Azure. But what I am actually stuck in is, well, I'm not stuck in, I am using a resource group that has been generated for me. Here's the name of the resource group, and it was generated. Remember how we started off with CSST and then LOD and then this number. This number is globally unique, and it only applies to me, which means no other user has this user account. No other user has this resource group. Now, if I wanted to, I could take a look at the subscription. Now, again, I don't have my subscription being used here, but I could actually see this using resources right now that have been spun up and prepared. But I just want to show you a success first. So I'm going to create a storage account, which is part of this lab. And you'll see here that I'm using an existing resource group, and I'm going to create a storage account with a certain name. It's going to go through my validation passed, and I'm going to click on create. Now, while that's deploying, I'm going to try to be a naughty monkey, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to create a virtual machine. So here I'm going to add a virtual machine. I'm going to put it into that same resource group. I'm going to give it a name called Brian's machine, put it in US East, no redundancy or anything like that. Pretty much everything default, and go ahead and review and create. And then I might get the sad trombone noise. Oh no, validation failed. Why the heck did it fail? Because it was disallowed by policy. So not only can I not create a high-end virtual machine that would rack up hundreds of dollars of fees, which you would then have to contest with Microsoft because it wasn't there, because you didn't want that to be used. But it was spun up on your account, or it was spun up on our account. That's the reason why we have that requirement for access control policies and why we limit things. Now, if I were to go back and try to be back on track with what I'm supposed to be doing, you will see that my storage account is all set up and is ready to go, and I could continue forward with creating containers and so on. And that, my friends, in a nutshell, is what CloudSlice is all about. Now, please keep in mind that that left side, instead of being a web browser, could very easily be a virtual machine, and I could be working inside of that virtual machine to access the Azure resources. Just remember that if you're using a virtual machine in our data centers are located globally, but they're East US, West US, EU, near in the UK, and Australia, which is our APAC coverage. So those are the four launch regions that are going to give you the best response if you're using virtual machines that are within our data center. So just remember those 4 locations. All right, from our current slide, let's go ahead and talk about some resources that are available for you. If you want to learn more about CloudSlice, we have a very, very short name, LODS.1/guide for CloudSlice, all one word, no spaces. This will give you that guide that I just showed you. You can also access that as a lab developer in the help as well. We really, really crave your feedback. So please go into the class where you entered the classroom here, where you clicked on Enter Classroom. Scroll down a little bit. You'll see an activity down below that is a feedback survey. Please give us your feedback. Let us know what you really loved, and let us know what we can do to improve. If you have a feature request, LODS.1/feedback. That allows you to get your request directly in line with our executive team and our developers to determine what timeline we have for making it available. Don't forget to post that pic on social media and to tag us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, and then I want to thank you for your time. And I saw a question come in. James, you were asking for a question. Is there a link for the ACL templates? And by ACL, I'm assuming you mean the access control policies that we were talking about. Let me stop my slideshow here and go back. If I go in and I'm in as a normal, developer under my cloud services, not only am I going to have subscription and subscription pools, I'm also going to have access to any resource templates that have been pre-built or I've already built. So I can go in and take a look at those. And here's an example of a storage account. So you can see here what one of these looks like. That's a resource template. If we're talking about ACLs or ACPs, though access control policies have a setting as well. And you can see here we have the LOD managed ones that are available to all users. All right. So I want to I want to repeat something that Paul says, and we don't pay Paul to say this about us, but this technology is simply the best technology that we have seen in educational resources for being able to spin up or make available to spin up cloud-based resources, allow people to use those resources for a focused amount of time, and then not just in the lab and have those resources sitting out there, but actually physically or virtually tearing those resources down and making sure that you're not ringing up extra cost, and B, you're getting good reporting technology about what was used and what wasn't used. So again, I can't express enough how much and how excited we are about Cloud Slice. There is tons of, I'm sure there are tons of other questions that come up about how do I do XYZ. We will be more than happy to help you out. If you don't, for any reason, have access to Cloud Slice, please contact your account executive or your technical account engineer. Or you can reach out to support at Learn On Demand Systems, and we'll get you in touch with somebody who can give you access to Slice. If there are any other questions, please type them now. We've got about 2 minutes left before we need to end, and then you need to get on your way to your next session. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you an extra 1 minute back. So if you enjoyed this, please make sure you give us some feedback. And if you didn't enjoy it, you leave us some feedback about what you needed to get out of this that you didn't get, so that we can make it better for the next one. Have a great rest of Launch 2020 Q4, and we will see you at another session later.